So it is now 7:40, and I'm calling the meeting to order. Mayor Kaki, and we have the following council members present. We have Phil Schulp. We have Jerry Lee Bennett. We have Stephen Piskowski. I'm writing these names down, sorry. We have Donna DeBose. And we have Mario Grande. And Barb is our interim manager, also presiding over this meeting with me. Okay, we're gonna proceed at 7:41 here for approval of agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? And I will take that silence as no changes. So that is approved as is.
Not for me.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. I know everybody is, we've got a few people like yourself that are not actually able to be viewing this entirely. So thank you though for letting me know.
No changes.
So, okay, Donna, thanks. I guess I think there was no changes, so I'm just going to say it was a unanimous approval. And I see Jerry Lee shaking her head and Phil too. So
Yes.
Okay, we got unanimous here. No changes. Okay, now we are asking for the approval of minutes. Are there any changes to minutes, or can we just approve them? So what we have first are the town council meeting minutes from February 15th. I'd like to take a moment and thank Councilmember Phil Schulp for chairing that meeting for me. Thank you, Phil, for doing that. And if there are any changes to the minutes, we can discuss them. Phil, I will leave you to, concede to the changes or not. So.
Yes, this is Jerry Lee. Under the American Rescue Plan update section, the council did discuss specifically that the committee that is supporting the town's consideration of options for use of the funds should be considered a town policy consideration that would be committee that would be making recommendations to the town government, and therefore its membership should be open and its meetings should be open. And there was a consensus of the council on that point, so I think it's important that we make that note in the minutes.
Thanks, Jerry Lee. Phil and Barb, you were there?
Reading I had stated that it was best practice for us to do that, regardless of whether or not it was legally required. It was still best practice, and we should be doing that, especially with this particular group.
Okay. Before we just get everybody's sense of this, would somebody like to recommend the sentence or edit? How would you like to characterize that? Could you put that in writing for us, or just speak it out loud, Jerry Lee or Phil?
Sure. I would just recommend stating the committee or the council agreed that the resident committee supporting the ARPA planning will conduct its meeting in accordance with the Open Meetings Act.
The council agreed that the resident committee supporting the ARPA funding.
We could call it a citizen committee, I guess. Maybe that's more appropriate.
Well, they are only allowed to be residents, so, right?
That's true. That's true.
Okay.
So the resident committee supporting the ARPA funding planning will conduct its meetings, its business, in accordance with the Open Meetings Act.
May I make a point, please? Jerry Lee?
Of course, Donna.
Thank you. No issue with the open meetings or whatever. Can we just, because we've been calling this like 3 or 4 different things, can we just stick with task force? Is that cool?
Oh,
Very official
absolutely. I was
sounding words,
looking at
like
the
I was
notes to
saying.
try and figure out what you were calling it. Right. Yeah. We should use the
Yes.
name that you've already given it.
Yeah, we
Sorry,
were just
what
calling
are
it
you gonna
task
call
force.
it?
We called it a task force across the board, and I just wanted to make sure we were consistent, that's all.
That, okay, so the council agreed that what do you want to call it, Donna? ARPA task force, what do you want to call it?
Yes, ma'am. ARPA task force, yes.
Okay, that the ARPA task force supporting the ARPA funding. Do we need planning in there? Will conduct its business in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. I have planning in there. You want me to drop that planning?
I don't think it's
Word.
Yeah,
required.
it's not part of planning.
Yeah,
It's not it's not a
Okay.
planning, no.
So supporting the ARPA funding will conduct its business in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. Good? Does that sound right?
Thank you.
Okay.
ma'am.
All right. So I'm taking that so we have at least Phil, Jerry Lee, and Donna agreeing with that insertion or that edit. And we have a majority, but if Stephen is hearing this or Mario, you don't really have to weigh in because we have a majority, but feel free.
It's fine. It's fine by me. I guess my thought was it could be written the way it's probably fine the way it is, but it could be written. I think Barb described something else as like a consensus of the council. I wasn't sure if Donna was aligned with the other 4 council members or not, but it sounded like just a minute ago it sounded like she was in agreement too. So that may not matter. So I didn't want to put words in Donna's mouth from February. Was all.
So the choice is whether to say the consensus of the council agreed, or just say the council agreed, right, Stephen?
Yeah,
Do you have a
my only
preference,
thought was I
Donna?
wasn't totally sure if Donna agreed on that or not. If she does agree, then the way it was just described would be fine. So
You have a preference,
I had-
Donna?
No, I do not have a preference. Either way, it turns out to have the same result.
Okay, this is for the minutes. All right, we'll just keep it as it is then. The council agreed. Is that okay?
That's perfectly fine by me.
Okay. Thanks, Stephen. And I'm guessing Mario, I mean, again,
Well,
now
no,
we have,
I'm good, Jackie. I'm just for the sake of time, and I agree, so I'm good. You'll hear from
Fine,
me if I
okay,
have a
great.
dissent.
all right, thank you. Are there any other changes to those minutes? Okay, if not, I think we have approval of these minutes with that edit. And we have no other changes. Is that right? I'm not seeing any other changes from anybody. Okay, we're going to call it a unanimous approval of the minutes with that edit. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Approved with edit. Okay, next, we do have a long meeting tonight. It is 7:48, and we are asking for any changes or approval to the budget work session minutes. If anybody has any changes to those, please speak up.
I missed those somehow. I didn't see them in the packet, so I never reviewed them. So I guess it's out of luck, I guess.
Well, let's see what everybody else says, Stephen. Maybe it's not enough to be concerned about if nobody else has changes. It's pretty, it wasn't a lot, actually. It was just one page. I think the major point of the minutes was that there's a increase in the operating reserve of 175 from 175 to 250. That's the exigency reserve. It's a targeted reserve. And so we were going to increase that by 75 to 250,000. Council asked for an increase to the Yendel Park Reserve from 50 to 75. I thought it was an extra 50. Okay, so we're going up to 75,000. Okay, and then a 3% COLA to town staff. That's basically it. We will have extra time to discuss the FY23 budget because it had a request for proposed full-time assistant town manager or deputy town manager. So that's in the minutes. I think that's it really, the salient points. Anybody, so are there any changes? Anybody else, any council members on the call here want to make anything change?
Not for me, Kaki. Mario, not for me. That was fine
I
with me.
think they're fine. This is Jerry Lee.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to approve those unanimously.
I was curious, was the tape of that meeting made available like other meetings, like on YouTube or?
Yes, it is, Stephen. It's out there now if anyone wanted to watch it.
Okay, thanks. I meant to go back to it.
Okay, we're at 7:51. Any presentation by residents? Okay, let's go to there's no request. Let's go to action items on the agenda. We have several. First is on the list is the 2022 town election possible use of voting technology. Our town manager, Barb, would you like to highlight anything specific before we make a motion, the council makes a motion?
Yes, just a few things. One, just as a reminder for anyone who may not recall this, is this research was done at the request of Phil, who wanted us to explore the use of some technological options that would speed up the tallying of the votes. I did want to share with the mayor and council that since the agenda packet went out at the end of last week, I did have some follow-up communications with ElecTech. So there were two options, one that used an electronic voting machine. After further discussion with ElecTech, I think we could probably get by with just using one voting machine. So that would lower the cost of that option to $3,960. With the other option, which was the use of an electronic scanner, our chief election judge, who is on the call with us this evening, did note, had asked a question specifically about absentee ballots. And when I went back to ElecTech, it turned out that they had not included basically the design of just the absentee ballots. So their cost actually went up on that from the $5,345. That was the option that was in your packet. The cost for that option went up to $6,070. And if anyone was interested, Louise had asked this question, our chief election judge, how much we had spent on voting by mail back in 2020. And that cost, just for comparison purposes, was $5,840. So with that, Mayor, I'll open up to any questions and look forward to hearing your feedback on this. Louise, is there anything that you wanted to add since you're taking the time to join us this evening?
No, because I think the general idea is that we will be voting in person and that we will try to use the outside as much as possible. If it's, either using contenting or good weather, or again, go back to the inside at the post office. But the date of the election is scheduled as May 2nd. So again, we're a little bit in the future. And the question really, from my understanding, was the counting of the ballots. And we've done them by hand counts. We have 3 election judges, and what we do is divide the number of ballots into small groups, and every judge counts every ballot, and then we tally up and we look to see if there's been any changes in the small groups, et cetera. So it takes about 2.5 hours to count the ballots, and the polls are going to be open from I believe it's 7 in the morning till 7:30 at night.
Right.
And the question is whether if you want to in-person count the ballots, which uses our town officers. Elizabeth is very much involved in this. The judges are involved in this, the 3 of us judges. And then we also count the provisional and we count the absentee ballots as well. We use double envelopes for the provisional, so we don't know exactly who's, we make it every attempt to make it uh, invisible to who actually submitted which provisional ballot. So I think it's a fair balloting system. And we've had people sit in and watch us count them in the past. It's a totally an open procedure, but the question is whether you do it for 2.5 hours that night, or the other way we've done it is come in the next day, the morning of the next day, and do it for 2.5 hours then, because it takes approximately 2.5 hours for 3 people plus Elizabeth plus probably Barbara being there.
Right.
So I think it's a fair system, but it's a question: do you want to pay $5,000 to have this done electronically? I don't know what time element they gave you back. And the question is how many people will be voting by absentee ballots,
Right.
because that we make that widely available. It used to be for students or for people who had a medical emergency, but for people who don't feel comfortable coming in person, or, and again, hopefully it will be an outside option too. We don't know how many absentee ballots we'll have this year. And then we always have a few provisionals that usually are half a dozen. And then so these are the 3 types of ballots we count, are the actual ballots, the paper ballots, the absentee ballots, which are paper as well, and then the provisionals. And it takes about 2.5 hours if we do it locally.
All right, if I can just tag on, if I may, to Louise's comment. So obviously both of the options from Electech do require machines that are plugged in. So that may kind of change the dynamic of possibly doing something, on the lawn or something like that. In terms of the timing issue, so with the use of the voting machine itself, any absentee ballots would still need to be counted, because obviously someone has to do that.
I mean, by hand.
By hand. And the use of the scanner, what would happen is the absentee ballots, as well as all the ballots, basically would have a code that can be read by the scanner, and everything would be fed through the scanner. In terms of the electronic machine option, obviously it somewhat depends on how many absentee ballots there are that have to be hand counted. In terms of using the scanner, Electech basically said that the results would probably be available in approximately 30 minutes, certainly less than an hour. So with that, I'll just open it up to any questions you all have or any discussion.
Hey, Barb, this is Stephen.
Mhm.
Those costs you were talking about, I'm assuming that's an all-in cost to do that process. But would it net out to be less versus the way we did it years ago? There would have been a printing cost for that. So I imagine the net cost would be a little less than that.
I think, and Elizabeth can correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine, Stephen, most of the items that were printed in terms of the ballots probably were done using the copier machine in the town office. There might have been some, Elizabeth can jump in here, there might have been some printing costs, possibly outside printing for the envelopes. So I think it's really just a matter of kind of your comfort level with, do you want to use an electronic option, or do you just want to kind of use the system? I do know, kind of adding on to Louise's comments, depending on, assuming we have a contested election and depending on the number of votes, obviously that can be a very long day when voting starts at 7 o'clock. So Louise had mentioned the possibility of just doing the count the following morning as a possibility. So I think we're just looking for some guidance and direction from you all this evening.
That's exactly why we changed it. I think it was about 5 years ago, that give a little relief to election judges and everyone else to not expect those results right after the election. But if we can do it electronically, I feel like it's a decent idea.
So is it possible to, for instance, instead of having 2 counters, to only have 1, and maybe adjust the number of ballots being printed and challenge ballots and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think some of that, Phil, was, I'm not sure if you're looking at are you looking at the scanning option, Phil?
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of guesswork. Certainly we can reduce those numbers. Obviously we need to make sure that there are ballots on hand, but 100 was kind of at least a guess for a placeholder in the cost estimate.
And for instance, do we need 2 scanners?
We could reduce that.
No.
No, not sure who said that.
So we could reduce that one.
But we don't really need to scan if we can have the ballot digitized, and then it automatically counts as well. I mean, we certainly have the money. I don't know what, and I know residents generally like to know the results of the election as soon as possible. So here is a remedy to produce quick and accurate results. Just curious why we want to be talking about counting by
Right.
hand.
Yeah, so that's what that was. I was just, hey, it's just, can you hear me, guys? I'm sorry, it's Mario.
We can.
Sorry. First of all, Barb and Louise, thank you for all this information, and you guys put a really lot of work and thought into this. So it does not go unnoticed by all of us. I know some of us appreciated you guys on email. I couldn't get to it, so I just wanted to say vocally. I was just going to say what Kathy said. We have money, so, and we're not talking about breaking the bank. So if it's about convenience and efficiency, why wouldn't we just proceed with what makes the most sense from a timing? Because cost isn't really, we're not talking tens of thousands of dollars here. So I'm sort of, I can't see anyone's face or anything. So I'm just guessing either people are saying shut up or nodding. I don't know. But I'm kind of going where Kathy's going. Money's not the issue. So let's be efficient and kind of forward thinking on this, and whatever makes the most sense in that regard, I would support that.
The only reason I was thinking about doing the scanner method, sorry if I cut somebody off, was because it leaves a paper trail behind if somebody in the future decides they want to look at it.
Yeah.
You want to go to the other one? That's fine with me too, but electronically, I think we'd be best to do either one.
Yeah, and Phil hit on something that has come up in some other communities, including one I worked in, Tacoma Park. We had a longtime resident there who worked for an organization called Fair Vote, and they had concerns about electronic voting machines. So I don't know what Tacoma Park has been doing in recent years since I've been gone for some time, but during my tenure there, they were using a scanning option, mainly because you had the ease of the processing of the ballots, but there was also hard copies of ballots that were available as a trail.
So you're talking about digital voting plus an extra step in scanning. So you have basically a copy of the ballot. Is that what?
Right.
Okay.
The scanning option basically has the ballots coded so they can be read by the scanner, but there are hard copies of the ballots that are maintained.
Okay.
And the scanner would, as it reads the ballot, it would also automatically be tabulating. Is that right?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay, so it's the same you get the efficiency and accuracy out of it as well as a paper trail. That makes sense.
I would have to agree with Kathy and Mario. I was going to ask the same thing. Maybe I was missing something about being counted by hand besides being just tradition. And this is something that's more up to date and accurate. And as you just explained, it actually does both, keeping a hard copy as well as an electronic copy.
Well, and that was the other thing that you did have by hand counting, is that we had the actual ballots and they were maintained. So that, again, we can do it anyway. So it's just a question of, is the money there and what your preference would be? And would you, for that extra 2.5 hours or whatever, would you prefer to have the results?
So could I get a clarification? This is Jerry Lee. In the scanning option, is that something we have to go back and get a new estimate for, or do we think that's covered within the estimate we have?
When they updated the estimate, Jerry Lee, since I sent out the agenda packet and it was posted to address the absentee ballot kind of design and printing, that's what took the cost up to $6,070. So that's a firm number. As I can certainly, with Elizabeth and Louise's involvement, kind of go back and have a call with ElecTech about, is there a way to possibly reduce the cost by, lowering the number of the scanners. I think that's a discussion I would like to have with ElecTech, with Louise and Elizabeth's involvement. So I think $6,070 would be the maximum cost that you would see.
And if I might, Barb, was that for 2 scanners?
Yes, Khaki, it was.
Okay. All right.
And there is an elect tech, and regardless of these two options, there is a technician from elect tech who would be on site.
And I guess
Okay,
I would go back to them and say, hey, if you're willing to throw in a spare for free on the voting machines, you should be able to throw in a spare for free on the scanners.
Well, I mean, let me be clear, they weren't throwing in a extra machine for free on the electronic option. There was a cost for both. So when they revised the proposal, it was removing one of the electronic voting machines. So they're not throwing in anything for free.
Okay, well, what I thought they said was unless you used it, you didn't have to pay for it.
No, I talked to them just on, I guess it was Friday, about some cost options, and just given when we went back and looked at some of the election data that Elizabeth had pulled, I think we agreed that we could probably get by with one voting machine. I would like to have the discussion once again with Louise and Elizabeth and Elect Tech about the number of scanners that might be needed, but we'll certainly explore if there's a way to lower that cost from the $6,070.
Barb, one more question. I'm sorry, Phil, did you have another one?
Just another quick one. Do we need the, we have our own voting booths, don't we?
cardboard.
The ones, I thought we've had something in the past. I mean,
Right, they're the cardboard sets that you take your paper ballot to and mark it. That's what we own.
I mean, so that would save us a few dollars if you wanted to.
Well, but you have to have a way then of what are you doing with a paper ballot? Like,
Yeah, you have to shield the scanner as it's reading them.
Well, the paper ballots go to secrecy sleeves. The secrecy sleeves, I thought that you dump the ballots, go into a big box, and then at the end of the night, the box is opened and all the ballots are then put through the scanner.
Yeah, I think that's a nuance, Phil, that I have not had that specific discussion with Elect Tech. But once again, I think that's something we can raise on the call that Elizabeth and Louise and I will have. Try to schedule that for later this week, subject to Louise's availability, of course.
Sorry,
So-
Jerry Lee.
Yeah, Jerry Lee, go ahead. I have a question, but go ahead.
Sorry. So in the last year, we agreed to use the voting service firm, but we adopted a provision that we
Correct.
would not hold an election if we had no contested elections. I didn't check ahead of time before the meeting, but Barb and Louise, is that an option for us? In other words, we would commit to this funding, but only if we actually needed to hold an election.
Yes, I did, Jerry, have that specific discussion with Elect Tech because obviously we want to make sure that we're on their schedule if we have a contested election and their services are needed. So the contract would require a deposit, but they said if we end up not having a contested election, therefore we don't need their services, that deposit would be refunded to us. So the town would not be out any money.
and our dates on that would be, again, if the Citizens Committee is running a nominations session on the 23rd, which is a Wednesday. It's a March 23rd, so it's coming up very quickly. And then we have 2 days where people can come and add to that by email. So by the 25th, the end of Friday, the 25th, like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we would know whether we're going to have a contested election or not. And the election itself would be May 2nd. So we have a period of time in there. So it isn't, and because during that time, financial forms have to be filled, et cetera, et cetera. But we should know whether we have a contested election by the end of the workday on the 25th of March.
Right.
Thank you, Barb and Louise. Louise, is such a provision allowable within our current ordinance to not hold an actual election if it's not contested? I couldn't remember if when we did that last year, that was subject to the governor's emergency provision.
No, that's part of our general thing.
Great.
If there are no, if their positions are filled and there's no candidates that do not have a position, et cetera, that there is no need for the election. That is the end of the election.
Thank you for that clarification. That certainly makes it a potentially more less costly provision from year to year if we know that some years we may not have to make that expense.
Okay, it is 8:10, and for the record, the question is this is an action item. Whether the council would be comfortable voting on the means of using voting technology, with the caveat that the price will be firmed up, or if you want to just, if you really want to wait or not, how would you like to proceed? And if anybody wants to proceed, please go ahead and put the question on the table. That means make the motion.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that says, now the one thing is, Barb, I'm sorry, I would need to know what was the not to exceed. We had a number that was up there.
Yeah, it was $6,070, Phil.
Okay, so I would make a motion, I'll go just a tad above that just in case. So I'll make a motion that we hire Elect Tech to assist us with the election through electronic equipment, not to exceed of $6,200.
Phil, may I ask a clarifying question? Are you, so you're at, just to be clear, you're talking about the use of the scanner, correct? Not the voting machine itself.
I left it, actually, the way I phrased it, I left it open.
Okay.
On the off chance that you guys want to do something different, although
Okay.
I myself would prefer that the scanner be used.
Okay, thank you, Phil.
Could I ask for a clarifying question? Barb, this price tag, that includes the design of the ballot?
Yes, yes, it
All right.
includes the data
Barcode.
entry. Yes, it includes everything, including the time and travel expense of the technician who would be on site. So that's included in both proposals.
I just wanted to be sure we were at a good enough ceiling there, Phil. You want to have any surprise. Okay, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Hey, Kathy. Hey, Phil. This is Mario. I was going to second, but I was just thinking, we don't want to get close to that line and not be able to. To Kathy's point, do we want to? I'm sorry, Barbara. The budget, the number was $6,070. You said
That's correct, Mario.
$50 on top of that just to give them some cushion. Okay, again, I don't know what that would encompass, but sure. Okay, I just, I don't know if if you go back to them and have a conversation with Louise, and Elizabeth may say we can do it for 60. All this magic for $6,500. Would we walk away? You know what I mean? So I don't know.
No, I'm with Mario on that. I was worried about the fuel.
I was just thinking the same thing.
You want to change it? Can I change it to 7,000? Everything's the same, but just make it 7,000.
If you're all happy with that. Okay,
I think
so
that's-
is there,
I would like to express a preference for the scanning if we can make that work within the budget.
and Jerry Lee, if it doesn't happen with the scanning though, you're still on board. I mean, right? Because we're not really we're not voting on the means right now, right? We're just
Yes, I'm
saying
comfortable-
generally.
Right. I'm comfortable
Okay.
with the way Phil phrased it. I just realized I had not made an expression that I think it is preferable to have the paper trail if we can get it.
Agree. Okay.
May
So-
I ask a clarifying question before you go to vote? I apologize. One more time, why would there not be a paper trail if it was not the scanning method?
Donna, think of it as when you go to vote, like in a presidential or congressional election, you're just going in and
Using a screen,
yeah,
digital
using a
screen.
screen, correct. Whereas
Gotcha.
with the scanner option, there would be a hard copy of the ballots that would be fed through the scanner and would be maintained for record keeping purposes.
But would there not be a record of what the voting machine would have as opposed to the scanner? I mean, that is also an official record, I would assume.
I would assume, but
Yes,
It'd have a tally, right?
it would have a tally.
I mean, the way they work at the county, or when we vote here at Garrett Park Elementary School, is we input it into the electronic system. It then prints out our result. We then put that ballot into a box to be preserved in case there is a problem. I don't know if that is any kind of an option for them to give us a printout that would then be stored.
I don't see why not. I mean, it's an official election. You have to have some sort of paper trail regardless of whether it's 2022 or 2095.
Right. Yeah, so I think the difference, Donna, is that if the voter is not able to see their printed result, then they may not feel comfortable that a result just stored in the cybersphere matches what they handed in. You see what I mean? So I think that printout has to be something that is printed and seen by the voter before they put it in a box, and then that's what's preserved to make people comfortable.
So it's more of a comfort issue than actually an official or unofficial tally method, if you will.
I don't want to make that. I don't want to be too flippant about the importance of that paper trail. That it allows you to make an audit. That
No, of course not. No, I concur with the paper trail, absolutely.
Right.
But I think it's the paper trail for the town sounds and should be more important than for the individual, I would think. Just putting it out there.
I appreciate the discussion and somewhat of a debate. It's 8:16. I know we have at least 3 members of the council who were on board with the motion to have voting technology, electronic technology, whether it's scanning or whichever, but with a ceiling, I think we were saying of 7,000. Could we go ahead and sort of arrest the discussion and finalize the motion, or did you really still want to keep?
No,
okay.
Just wanted to clarify and make sure it is out there. Thank you.
Right.
Okay, I appreciate the
consensus. Everybody wanted a paper trail of some sort, right? Not pure digital.
Right.
Okay.
All right. I'd like to, just because we have a long meeting ahead.
So I'm going to just second Phil's motion to support electronic voting with the ceiling of $7,000.
Okay. All in favor, just vote. Let's just go quickly through this. All in favor. Phil, you made the motion. Jerry Lee?
Aye.
Yes. Stephen?
Yes.
Okay. Donna?
Aye.
Okay, and we had Phil, and so that's a unanimous. All right, motion is passed. Thank you. Okay. 8:18 for the tape. We have a request from the Montgomery County Sanitation for an increased payment due to the escalated diesel fuel prices. Barb, would you like to just kind of give a highlight of this?
Yeah, I'll just. Yeah, I think everyone who has gassed up their car recently knows what's happening with fuel prices, and diesel fuel is no exception to that. Just to kind of put it in perspective, a month ago, the average diesel price, according to AAA in the Maryland, DC metro area, was roughly $3.91. It hit a peak now of $5 and roughly 23 cents. So that's sort of what's been happening on the diesel front. So our hauler contacted me last week to basically request essentially a fuel surcharge. Specifically, he requested an increase of $1,500 per month on our base service. That equates to about a 15% cost increase. The request was retroactive back to March 1st. And basically, I had a discussion about, well, what happens if by some miracle fuel prices actually drop? I did not want to bring something forward to you all that you would be committing for 6 months. He said his threshold where he feels he could go back to the original contracted price was $3.60 per gallon for diesel. So I think that's the issue, that's kind of immediate issue that's before you is, do you want to honor this request? There is nothing in the contract, regarding any type of fuel surcharge. So I think it's really very much at your discretion. This would be kind of a deviation from, I guess, normal contract procedures. But I think the decision is yours as a policymaker. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Barb?
Hey, Barb, it's Mario. I'm just laughing because, I work in the trucking industry. My whole life is the cost of diesel. So, you mentioned the threshold, and then, to go back, diesel's not going down anytime soon, but
Right.
we would have is it going to be a fluctuating cap here then, or a fluctuating surcharge, or just going to keep it at one price, and then that's just going to stay that price until it goes down to a certain level, or is there something in between? I mean, should we be negotiating different tiers?
I think that's possible, Mario. I've been having some discussions. This has been a hot topic of discussion. I know the mayor has shared with me about a week or so ago, some correspondence she was having with other mayors. This has certainly been a hot topic among other managers, and everyone's trying to figure out how to deal with it. Many of those who have the same hauler we do are actually either having their meeting tonight or later this week. He specifically asked for a $1,500 increase, Mario. So he's sort of capping it. I guess the question is, if it went higher, even more than it is now, would he be coming back? And I don't think it would be unreasonable if we wanted to try to index this in somehow that if prices maybe fall, but not all the way down to the $3.60, should the town still be paying the $1,500? I think.
Right.
I think they would be grateful for anything that we did for them.
Could I add another piece of information to this? And Barb, correct me if I've got the numbers wrong. But for perspective, we currently have a contract for the year of around 124,000, give or take.
Right.
And that equates to roughly $342 or $45 per household.
Right. What's in the budget information that I gave you that we'll be talking about momentarily, the current contract pricing equates to a $345 per household charge for FY 2023. That figure does not include any type of surcharge being built into it.
Right. And if this $1,500 is approved by council, that's roughly about $4 more per household.
That's correct.
Yeah, using that, right? Okay,
yep, right.
Just so people have a sense of that. Okay. Does anybody have any more questions about this? Would you like anybody to make a motion to accept or not? Go ahead, Phil.
How does this compare to other towns?
It's a good question. Like I say, I was able to touch base with Chevy Chase Section 3, who has had a meeting. They are trying to work out some type of indexing similar to what Mario just asked about. They will actually be bidding their contract soon. So I think part of what they're trying to do is to come up with a system that not only works for the present situation, but that they can incorporate into their future contract. So they're spending quite a bit of time, I think, trying to figure out how to work this out. They basically, write that down. We had roughly a 15% increase. The numbers that their town manager sent to me said that they're getting asked for a 15.6% increase. Glen Echo, which has the same hauler, and they are meeting tonight, so I don't know what their outcome's going to be. They were approached about a 10.1% increase. I imagine that part of the difference may be the size of the communities and the number of households served. I'm sure that's what the hauler looked at. And the service structure.
Right. Correct. Because we get trash picked up twice a week, plus the recycle, plus the yard waste, and some of the other municipalities who are dealing with the same question being asked by the vendor, by the hauler, they don't have quite the extent of services that we actually get. So it's a little different.
So could the money that we're talking about, that we agreed to increase on the contingency money, could that be used for this? I mean, we have the money, right? And you're talking about $1,500. I'm sorry, Bob, was it just total or per month?
Per month.
Okay.
It's about $4. $4 more per household.
Right,
Per month.
right. And
Right.
obviously for FY,
Yeah.
for FY 2022, obviously the household fee is what it is. So that would just result in, you know, a greater subsidy that's already budgeted.
Right.
Correct.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I personally have no problem with it. It's just a reality we're living in. I mean, not to draw a line and make, I mean, it's going to come back one way or the other. So I have no problem supporting the request. However, I would like to see if we can create some sort of tier structure or something where some in between, so it's not all or nothing, Barb.
Sure,
Um,
okay.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know where the right threshold or right cut should be, but you know, somewhere where it is today, because I do think it's going to go higher. So I also want to make sure they don't come back with hat in hand again the second time.
Right.
So we need a lot to say in it, but also if it does happen by some miracle come down, which I don't, no one in the trucking industry thinks it's coming down anytime soon. We should try to, you know, claw back some of that money.
Yeah, I think the only thing, I think everyone may have heard of this, Mario, I'm sure you're probably tracking this, but obviously they're fast tracking a bill through the Maryland legislature to suspend the state imposed gas tax for at least a period of 30 days. So I think we may just see, you know, if that passes, which I won't be surprised if it does. It seems to have united everybody in Annapolis. You know, that's going to be a 30-day window, but that would take a, you know, I think it's like, I think the state gas tax is like 37 cents.
That going to include diesel though? Is that going to include diesel or that can be only for past for?
I'm not sure, Mario. I have not had
no.
the chance to look into that. So that's a good point. It may not.
Yeah, it may not. Yeah, it may not. It may not have. It might not apply to commercial because commercial trucking does get they do get a fuel surcharge they can build into their costs, you know, to their
Right.
shippers and stuff. So they get that. They get some of that money back. So
Right.
it may not apply for commercial trucking. I mean, I don't know. Good. I'm just speculating.
So here's a question. Oh, go ahead, Jerry Lee. Go ahead.
I just wondered if we would want to consider perhaps to agree to it through this fiscal year, but not for the full 6 months, you know, to be considered for extension beyond into the next fiscal year. That would be 4 months, I think, that we'd be agreeing to with a 2-month extension consideration. If it's still needed, just an option to consider.
Well, you know, along those lines, one of the things I was thinking is for next year's budget, that if we're gonna go with 6 months, that we build that money in there, so we may have to go $1 or $2 extra a month. And maybe we just do $1 or $2 extra a month across the board up front, so we'll kind of recover some of it, but at the very
Right.
least, we'll be able to at least finance it in the future. Right now, obviously, we can't. What it is, but we can set the rate for next year.
Okay.
And I would agree with Mario, if it's possible to get a tiered structure, that would be pretty nice.
So is there a motion?
Okay, I'll move that we approve the surcharge in a tiered fashion to be up to $1,500 per month for the next 6 months, with Barb to work on trying to come up with a tiered structure or something where it's not just a single money. So basically, the motion would be that say that approve up to $1,500 a month as a surcharge for the trash delivery for 6 months,
Not to exceed 6 months.
not to exceed
Yeah.
not to exceed 1,500.
And right. And this would be retroactive to March 1st.
Apparently, it would be, yes.
That is what they're requesting, yes.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Yeah, this is Mario. I'll second that. I like Phil's idea. And, you know, again,
Okay.
we can always, you know, we'll get a sense of where we are with the economy and all that kind of stuff in, you know, in 5 months, and they'll come back and we'll have a second round of this. But yes, I second Phil's motion.
Okay. So all in favor? Jerry Lee, I'm going to start with you.
Yes, I'm in favor with that.
Okay. Stephen?
Yes.
Okay, Donna?
Aye.
Okay, and then we've got Mario already and Bill. So, okay, so approved, and you've got that with those caveats, Barb.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Giving you a minute, and now we're at 8:30. We
Sorry,
Or at the-
sorry, one question or comment. I guess
Yeah.
we requested the motion with a tier, but what if they come back and say no tier? I guess we just accept the 1,500 and then for 6 months, and then after that we'll revisit the deal. Right? I mean, the motion was to try to get a
I
tier,
got-
but there's no. Is that a fair question?
Right.
Like, there's no guarantee they can offer us a tier. So I guess we just
That's
move
right.
forward with the 6 months. We just move forward
In
6
my-
months regardless. Sorry, I'll
My
stop.
under-
Yeah.
No, it's fair question. My understanding was that it was not to exceed $1,500. So, if there's a tiering that might result in less than 1,500 throughout these 6 months, that's to our advantage. But otherwise, I thought we were sort of topping it at 1,500. That's kind of where I thought people were. Is that
was
right?
Yes, that was my intention. Top it at
Okay.
15, top it at 6 months.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm good. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, good. All right, we are at 8:31, and we have the introduction of the ordinance of 2022-2 fiscal year 23 budget. And I'm gonna let Barb, if you want to give any highlights. I don't know if people want to start with any basic questions. I'm going to defer. Barb, you go ahead and
Yeah,
lead us through this.
I'll just be very brief and just, there was a fairly detailed explanation of some of the major changes in the agenda packet. So, and out of respect for your time, I'll try to make it quick. In terms of real property taxes and personal property taxes, no change in the tax rates are proposed. As far as real property, everyone is, I think, aware that property in Maryland is reassessed on a triennial basis. FY 2023 will be the second year of that 3-year phase-in period. Income taxes are something, I think, as we talked about at the budget work session back in February, it is notoriously a challenging revenue source to predict. As of through the end of February, we are down by about 45,000 compared to the same time in 2021 and in 2020. And it's not really clear why. I have reached out to the state comptroller's office. They have gotten similar inquiries from other municipalities in Maryland and in our area, and I think across the state. So they are doing some investigation, but it's really unclear what is happening at this point. I think just looking at sort of what we have brought in prior years, I did put a $20,000 increase compared to the budgeted amount for FY 2022 because we only budgeted 450,000. I'm hoping that I was trying not to be overly conservative or overly out there. So hopefully that number is at least close to where we'll hit the mark. But I think realistically, there will not be much more information available before your April meeting when you are scheduled to approve the budget. On a brighter note, we do get a tax duplication payment from Montgomery County. This is a partial reimbursement for services that the county does not provide in the various municipalities, but for which the county receives taxes from Garrett Park residents. This has been a longstanding issue, a debate in terms of what are the appropriate formulas as long as I have worked in Maryland. During my time in Tacoma Park and Rockville, I was on a task force appointed by Ike Leggett to try to work this out. So this has been an ongoing issue. Earlier today, Expedited Bill 222 was signed by the county executive. And this is basically an effort on the part of the county to more accurately recognize taxpayer-supported spending by municipalities. It actually codified the formulas that are used to calculate the tax duplication payments for each of the payment areas. And it also addressed some concerns the municipalities have had in recent years, for many years, about actually when we get information about what the payment amount will be. Typically, the county has not released that information until the county executive's budget is approved, or introduced, which would be tomorrow. So basically, the county legislation did provide for a 3-year phase-in period, which will begin in FY 2023. So our tax duplication payment this year is roughly $56,000 in that neighborhood. Based on the table that was included in expedited bill 222, we are scheduled to receive approximately $91,000 in FY 2023. And once the 3-year phase-in period is complete, based on current data, it's actually reassessed every year in terms of the county's cost of service. But in theory, by the time we get to 2025 and the phase-in period is completed, we would get in the neighborhood of $114,000. So that's certainly good news. Municipal refuse collection, you've had a lot of conversation about this. So I think really the only decision for you this evening is whether or not you want to bump up, as Phil has suggested, the $345 per household cost, taking into account what's happening with fuel prices. So I'm sure that might be something you want to discuss before the budget comes back before you for adoption. On the staffing side, there is a proposed new position included in the budget that affects a number of line items. The position title is Assistant Town Manager, Town Clerk. And this was something you talked about somewhat extensively at the retreat. In terms of our existing staff, the budget proposes a 3% COLA for our 4 existing town employees. This was something you did talk about at the retreat in February, and there seemed to be a consensus to grant a 3% COLA. The mayor and I did discuss doing something a little extra in light of what some other communities are doing. And the budget contemplates, in addition to the 3% COLA, a one-time lump sum payment of $1,000 to each of those 4 existing staff members. Included in your agenda packet is some fairly detailed information on the IT front. There's the traditional cost we have for website hosting, our network and software licensing, backup, help desk services. If you happen to look at the year to date and wondered kind of what was going on, many of those costs, like our website hosting, our network and software licensing, those are annual costs. And in looking at the detail earlier today, those costs have not yet been charged. They will come due either between now and June 30th. New items include the purchase of a new desktop, laptop, and configuration of the same. In filling out our cybersecurity application for this year, we are not following some of the best practices in IT. So the budget does include $5,000 for a third-party security assessment. This is something that pretty much every private and public sector companies do. We have, as the mayor can certainly speak to, have had some periodic problems with the stability of our connection in the town office because we are operating on wireless. So there is $5,000 included for a wiring project that would basically kind of keep us from running solely on wireless in the office. Obviously, this is somewhat tied to your eventual decision on any renovation of the town office. So certainly this project should not move forward until there's some resolution of that. And then there's just some things about purchase of a switch and installation of that to reduce some troubleshooting time if there was an issue with the server. And then some what's referred to as journaling of the email boxes to basically fulfill some information retention requirements. So there is a number of new items that are contemplated in the FY 2023 budget in line item 11.7. Some other minor increases. Mayor and I discussed increasing the tree, parks, and grounds budget by about $10,000. In talking to the town arborist, certainly our urban forest is getting older, so there's more maintenance involved. And also, Mr. Normandy indicated that the cost of tree services, has gone up. And then lastly, the mayor expressed a desire to add an additional $10,000 for perhaps some escalated service for leaf pickup and street sweeping. So that's kind of everything in a nutshell. Mayor, is there anything that I overlooked, Kaki, that you and I talked about that I neglected to mention?
The only thing I would add, Barb, is that while there might have been some discussion about the local property tax rate of 20.45 cents is what we've been doing, and the state came out with a constant yield tax rate of higher because they were assessing property values to be lower and to achieve the same revenue level as this past year, they were raising the constant tax yield rate. We decided just to go ahead and keep our local tax rate the same, although I will just have an opinion that if we wanted to lower it, we could. I look back even at the last couple of years, and this seems to be what I've seen the state do. They raise the constant yield tax rate, and then we end up still keeping our local tax rate the same as it's been, and only to see that our assessments do go up and we still get plenty of revenue. I know there's been discussions about, well, any excess revenue, or if you like surplus, we can put it into capital, maybe on the town hall renovation. So I just want you to know we haven't changed the local property tax rate. It still sits at the 20.45 cents, unless people want to actually have that discussion, which might take more time tonight. But that's the only thing I wanted to make note of, that is remaining the same.
Thank you. And I think, I'm sorry, Phil, go ahead.
I was just going to add something to that. As I understand, though, our assessed value went down slightly, like 3.1 or 2 million or something to that effect.
Yeah, it went down slightly. Basically, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation is anticipating that $11 million in deletions because of appeals of property values, and I guess deeming those appeals to be successful in many cases. So that's obviously a question mark, but that is our net assessable base, you are correct, Phil, is projected to go down slightly, and largely because of the assumed successful appeals.
And I'd like to add, though, Phil, historically, we've had abatements that high before. And even then, when the assessment is down, the actual value actually goes up.
Right.
And that's what's been happening. I mean, I just looked at that earlier today, that, okay, so they say it's going to go down. They say we have the abatements, but in the end, the next, year, we end up actually with much higher value. So,
Right.
They're just forecasting anyway, right? It's not.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Anyway.
Quick little thing. I think Phil and I have been on the council, but I've been on 5 years, and I think Phil's been on longer than I, but other members are new. Just a little bit of history on the tax rate. The first year I was on, the rate was 0.21. The mayor at that time proposed lowering it to 0.20. And his rationale was that the Trump administration was going to put a cap on the salt taxes that we all have, thinking that would really affected us. So the rate went down to 0.20. And I think it was about 2 years later, correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor Kaki, but you had done some studies kind of looking at the constant yield and a little bit of forecasting on your own, and you had proposed moving it back up to 0.2, was it 0.2045? That's just a little
half a penny, right? Half a penny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And we have historical rates that go back. When I first moved into town in 1998, they were at 55 cents for every $100 assessed value. So, but we have been probably since 2000, the early 2000s, we've been holding steady between 21 cents and 20 briefly, and then this 20 and a half, not quite a half. Yeah. And we've done some other modeling. I'm sorry, Stephen, I just wanted to add this, that, we have a nice sophisticated little model that, for every change, we can actually estimate the change in revenue. So knocking it back down to like 20 cents, like removing that 0.45, it saves us maybe $12,000 to $14,000. Now that's based on the current assessed value that the state's offered. If in the end the assessed value actually goes up, then we actually see a result of a greater reduction. But it's not significant, actually.
Okay.
Anyway, it all depends on the actual assessed value, the
Yeah,
actual.
if I can follow up on Phil's comment earlier about kind of the refuse collection. Phil, you had mentioned kind of what happens, what does the $1,500 a month equate to in terms of kind of household assessment? I think the mayor touched on this, but it's basically $4.15 per household. So I think some of this is kind of guesswork on your part and mine in terms of, if you end up with a $1,500 a month surcharge, how long will that be in place? And how does that translate into what you want to assess each household for trash service?
Well, I was gonna, if we're done with the constant rate thing, then I would bring that up, but I was just waiting until, I wasn't sure if we were done with the constant rate thing, otherwise I was gonna bring that up.
I think, Kaki, are you just looking for questions and discussion at this point from the council?
Yeah, you gave your bit. I mentioned the tax rate. So if there's any more discussion, if there isn't, happy if somebody would like to make a motion. There is the actual document for the ordinance
Right.
Can I make,
in the packet.
can we make the change though to up the garbage rate by say $3?
Yes. I mean, I think that's,
By how much?
3? I was I'm running a little bit on it because it was approximately 4.25, I think you said.
yeah, it's $4.15 per household is what $1,500 equates to.
And that's dependent on the number in the household. I'm not convinced we got the right number here. I think the estimate has been about 366, right, Barb? Isn't that the number of households?
It was a little bit of a mystery because
Yeah.
I went back to Andrea's notes that had 361 in one place, 366 in another. I did check with the county. They billed 364, but I'm always going to err on the side of being conservative. And so the number I've been using is 361 households.
Okay, so that's slightly up. But Phil, I probably would caution using the dollars per household and just use your 1,500 and as a multiplier for 12 months and use that as the cap for the increase.
That's fine.
Does that make sense?
Yep. And then
Because I don't. This is the proposal from the hauler, right, Barb? It's 1,500. They stated $1,500.
They said a flat amount as opposed to some
They're
kind
not.
of tiered structure that you all voted on earlier.
Right, but they're also not basing it specifically on a number per household. That's why I'm trying to get away from that.
No, they're not.
I was
right.
giving you all a context of what it could cost, but we don't know. I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
whatever the count, it seems to be varying here, the household number.
So then, yeah, and that makes perfect sense. So then how about then we increase it by 7,500, which would be essentially the whole thing. Or we could make it 7,000. It's the round number. Which
Are you doing that for 6 months? Because that's more than
no,
you
you're right.
talking about 9,000 or?
It would have to be more like, I mean, the whole 12 months.
Are you doing it for 6?
No, should do it.
Sorry.
I was looking at the whole 12 months.
It'd have to be like 1,800 in order to cover 1,500 for 12 months, right?
18,000.
Yeah.
18,000, sorry, not 1,800.
Yeah, part of your challenge is you're crossing fiscal years. So
Yeah.
do you want to just consider, a subsidy for FY 2022, or do you want to set your FY 2023 rate to try to collect the subsidy in FY 2022, if that makes sense?
Oh, to even collect back? I wouldn't do that.
But yeah, I think it would be simpler just to sort of kind of guesstimate how many months in next fiscal year you assume that a surcharge might be in effect and just kind of back into it that way.
You could hold it towards until the mid-year. You could calculate for the mid-year.
Actually, you really can't, not on the revenue side of things, because we have to submit our tax rates, including the household charge, to the county by the end of May. It might even be a little bit earlier than that.
So
So,
Mhm.
how about if we make
Right.
it 15,000 then? That would bring us a little short. It would be 18,000 if you went 1,500, and it would bring us, that would basically be 10 months worth, unless we want to go the whole 18,000, which I'm fine with also.
I mean, it does seem like in FY22, we should be able to cover the additional part out of contingency. So we
Right.
shouldn't have to recoup in 23.
Right. I agree with you, Jerry
Right.
Lee.
I agree.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to set it for next year, how much I think we should
Mhm.
bump it up,
Right.
because I'm gonna assume that, like Mario said, it's not gonna go down anytime soon.
So if you still want to consider the fiscal year 12 months and just do that for, then do the 18,000 like you're suggesting, you can do that. Or you can cut it in, you know, half, I guess. I mean, it's up to you all.
I was gonna propose.
And that doesn't mean we still aren't, oh no, we have to submit this in
Right.
May, right?
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
So that's
Well-
why I thought of 15,000, because 15,000 is 10 months worth,
Okay.
and well, I'd take a hit for $3,000, which isn't a lot, or we'll end up a little extra at some time.
So
I'd
Phil,
make it easy, just do 12 months. If I were you.
Okay, that's fine. 12. I'm fine.
I mean,
with
just because it's, you don't have to go back and revisit unless, we already know that there's a change. I don't know, Barb.
I do have a question about how that would work in practice if
Mhm.
we have a contract for the lower amount. If we don't end up having to provide a surcharge in the future, do we then have to rebate the residents, and how complex is that?
The other thing I would just remind you all, and not to make this even more complicated, but in FY 2022, because the contract wasn't executed until October of 21, there's already a structural subsidy budgeted in FY 2022.
Mhm.
And I think in talking to Andrea, I think at least her thinking was to sort of, this is before the whole fuel surcharge was, to go back. It's not that much money. I think the budgeted deficit I had written this down, in 2022 is about $7,500. I think it'll actually be, so that was the budgeted deficit in 2022.
So we would still be having to pay $7,500 out of contingency. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think, Kaki, it'll probably be a little lower because Andrea had assumed some tipping costs that actually went away, tipping fees that
Okay.
actually went away, but those went away, but now we're having a surcharge coming on board in FY 2022. So, if you think about
Whatever we, I'm
yeah, I
sorry.
mean, if you think about a potentially $1,500 surcharge for, March, April, May, and June, that's another $6,000.
Mhm. Right,
you
but
know,
we
I-
have that money.
Right, we do. I think that your focus
Mhm.
probably should be more on FY 2023 because of the
Mhm.
impact on the household assessment rate, and we have a very
Mhm.
narrow window to decide what that's going to be.
So let's
Right.
go back to the mechanics that Jerry Lee mentioned. Jerry Lee, do you mind? If we go ahead and do either the 15,000 or round up to or not round, or go to 18,000 for 12 months, we are going to, first we have to handle that with the county in May. But
Right.
secondly, do we enter into a modification of the contract with a hauler to adjust that contract amount for that 12 months? Because that's where I'm going with, well, do you want to just do it for 12 months, or do you just want to do it for like 10 months, like Phil was first thinking with 15,000? So I just mechanically, I just wanted to ask your opinion on that, Barb. And Jerry Lee, am I anywhere close to where you were thinking, or you have another question to that?
Well, I was trying to understand if the county collects the higher amount from residents, are we then obligated, if we don't change the contract for that full period, once the surcharge is gone and we're back to our normal rate, aren't we then
Right,
obligated
I hear you.
to rebate to the homeowners, which sounds complex to me?
Right. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that. I think partially, I think depending on what actually happens, you could view, if costs in FY 2023 are not as high as we're all expecting, I think part of what you could view that as making up for some of the deficit that you covered in FY 2022. The other way of potentially looking at it, is you take any overage that residents paid in FY 2023 and you lower the household rate in 2024. Obviously, the kind of the fallacy in that analysis is that you don't necessarily have the same residents living in town 100% in 2024 versus 2023 versus 2022.
Good.
So I
Yeah,
think some modest increase in the household fee based particularly on Mario's comments, who knows probably more about this than any of us do on this call combined. He doesn't see the situation resolving itself. So I think it's a matter of, how worried are you about, there's any kind of fuel surcharge being in place the entire fiscal year? And how concerned are you about making sure that fuel surcharge is covered or not? I certainly would recommend that you probably bump it up from the $345 that the budget is predicated on, just given the economic climate right now.
well, and the other thing we shouldn't forget is that even if we went less, like to Phil's point, if we did it for 10 months, or if we did it for 6 months, and that would be the figure that we would give in May, we have a healthy contingency that we could still also subsidize out of in FY23 if we needed to. So we wouldn't have to look for an abatement or anything like that.
Well, the other thing to consider is we are liable to get hit by fuel charges with other vendors. I mean, the leaf.
I thought about
Picks up the leaf. They're going to hit us.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
It's all coming. It's all coming, guys.
Mhm.
It's all coming. That's a great point, Phil.
Yeah, it is. That's a very good point. Maybe we should just, I don't mean to press upon anybody, but maybe just to make this easy and to keep moving, we should just go with it. It's only a few $1,000 difference. Maybe just go to the 18,000 that's been mentioned already. Because you're right, I forgot, but I had thought about that earlier about, the leaf removal and street sweeping. I know that's going to come.
Yeah, so to put this in
And we have that built in already, in a way.
Yeah,
right?
so if I may, so if we're saying to bump up our anticipated expenses by 18,000, which is what I think I'm hearing, and we were to divide that by 361 households, and that's basically another $50 per household.
That's per year.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
That rough number of $4 that you were talking about earlier.
That was per month, right? That was $415 per household per month.
Right. I agree with Murray. I don't see where we're going to pay for it one way or the other, So I'm going to suggest the 18,000.
Okay.
And Phil, just to tag on to that, so you would be recommending an additional, up the expenditures by 18,000 and up the household assessment from 345 to 395?
Do we need that number in case
Um,
the household numbers actually change?
Well, it's going to affect the revenue side. So yeah, I think having some clarity, Kaki, this evening would be
Okay.
helpful. So that way, whatever I bring back in April is reflecting what the group's desire is.
Okay.
Well, I was
All right.
so I was going to go with the 18,000, and I guess I'll let if your number, whatever your numbers work out to be.
Okay.
So is that 345 per household now?
It's 345 now. If you were trying to cover the entire 18,000, it would be go from 345 to 395.
I mean, if somebody wants to,
I thought it was, I'm sorry, I thought it was $4 more per household per month.
It's 415 per household,
So we're
415
about
for each
350.
household per month, right? So it's 415 times 12 for each household.
Right. That's where your $50 came from.
Correct.
Right. So it's it's about roughly about $350 per household per month.
No, the
Right now it's 345.
hold on a second.
95, almost 400.
Yeah, the $4.15 per household is a per month cost.
Okay.
So, I mean, I know this is already a lengthy conversation, but should we consider whether we should take this out of our budget for the residents rather than assessing the residents for this additional surcharge? I just want to make sure we've considered all the appropriate
Yeah.
options.
I like that thought, Jerry. I was just thinking more or less the same lines because we don't really know. And to your point, for apples to apples, the contract we have is not going to change. And the contract we have with leaf blowers, Sweetland, is not going to change. It's a little fuzzy, right? So I agree. Maybe there's another way to pull this money in or split the difference because we know we already agreed for 6 months for the rest of this fiscal year. We can factor that in. Oh, that's what this is for next year. Never mind. So it's hard to keep up. But I tend to agree with you, Shirley. Maybe there's another way to pull the money.
Could we perhaps table that while while Barb answers any other questions we have about the
Yeah.
budget proposal? Because there were a couple of things I was unclear about.
Sure.
Okay, so let me get them in order here. Under 11.2.4, I noticed that the webmaster drops from 6,000 to 0. Is that because you've consolidated that function into some other line item, Barb?
Yeah, I'm not really exactly sure, Jerry, why that cost was there in FY 2022, because that function was performed by Joanne Schmader. But the cost of her salary was actually reflected in 11.22.
Okay.
So my assumption was that if the new position was approved, that those webmaster duties would be performed by that new position.
Okay. And if I understood correctly from your notes, there would be essentially a $15,000 drop for the office support contracting down to 20,000 in lieu of the new position. Is that correct?
Roughly, what was included in the current year budget, Jerry, in FY 2022, is Andrea had budgeted roughly 15,000 for Joanne Schmader's services. But I think just because of the thinly staffed office, Andrea had 35,000 built in for hiring someone like a Debbie Sandlin or something like that to help with additional projects. So Andrea had roughly 50,000 in for those items. I looked at actual spending versus what was budgeting with the figure I gave you versus what Andrea had budgeted.
Oh, okay. So that explains the difference.
Right.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah, when I prepared the materials for the budget work session, I tried to look at what had actually been spent, not what was budgeted.
Okay.
So not to overstate anything.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, and I did in your notes there was a reference to $15,000 for lumber and light, but I wasn't familiar what that is.
No, I'm sorry. They are the company that was hired, I believe, in FY 2022 during Andrea's tenure to do a space assessment of the town office renovation. And basically that's still moving along. I'm hoping to have some information for you within the next 30 to 60 days. But that 15,000 assumes that you all decide to move forward with some type of either furniture procurement or renovation in the town office, and they would essentially be acting as the town's agent in terms of, procuring services.
Okay, so that wouldn't be an extension. Well, it would be an extension of their contract, but to implement their recommendations is what you're.
Right. It would actually be almost a second phase of work. So they're pretty close to wrapping up their first phase of work, which is actually having options for you all to consider. One, which would basically stay within the existing footprint of the town office. There are also some options that they have developed in the event that you all were to support taking over one or both of the former tenant spaces. So all of that information will come back to you all. So you can actually, I've mentioned to Khaki that a work session might be appropriate when they finish the first phase of their work, so they can kind of walk through everything with you all. The 15,000 would only be needed if you decide to move forward with phase 2.
Thank you. And then I'm not sure I have the number on this one. There was a reference to needing some sort of increase to road maintenance. Is that the potential for a surcharge that Khaki was just now referencing? It wasn't clear to me in the notes what this referred to. It was like $70,000.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The $10,000, it had nothing to do with the surcharge because I didn't want to assume anything. And plus that just came up like Wednesday of this week. That would assume that there's either some cost increases or that you all desire to maybe expand street sweeping services, for example. So the $10,000 was intended to cover some potential cost increase for those services, as well as maybe do an additional street sweeping per year.
Thank you for clarifying.
Not so much a question, but just a comment. Just again, I've been around, I guess this is my 5th year on the council. Some of the members are newer, but I brought this up in some recent years when we've been discussing the budget, but I happened across the copy I had a fiscal year 18 budget. We had a total operating expense in the budget then, it was 5 years ago, 954. We're now up to, was it 1.438? That's like 50% more in 5 years. And even if you back out inflation, I think it's still north of 40 that's gone up. I'm just saying, I'm not sure if that's, I have a little bit of opinion that perhaps we were a little bit too frugal a couple of years ago, but it's just a pretty big rise. And just for some examples within that, personnel, the budget we had 5 years ago was 407. Now we're talking 727, so almost double. Town administration was 102, now more than double at 223. Town committees was 18.9, so that's nearly triple, 51.8. Infrastructure was 139.5, now it's 192. Town services was 184, 194 now, so it's pretty similar. I guess that one just doesn't move too much. So just wanted to point that out. I think it's something we all need to be cognizant of as we deal with this each year.
Just to play devil's advocate, this is my freshman year at this, but a longer term resident of Garrett Park. It could be that it's not so much an issue, but the situation may be that we just weren't up to speed in the previous years, in my opinion. Just from my point, just from my experience, salaries have increased considerably in the last 5 years, and the infrastructure that Garrett Park needs and deserves, I think this is better reflecting it than it was in the past. We're not just a sleepy little town outside of Washington, D.C. in the end. Thanks.
I've got a question regarding the IT, and I wanted to know, excuse me, you're buying some new equipment, and we're going up to 56,000. And I was wondering, should some of that come under capital, or is it because it's considered less than 3 years, or how do you work that?
Yeah, I think one of the questions, and I can't recall, Phil, if it was you or someone else back at the work session in February, ask a very good question about what is what is the difference between operating expenses and capital? So I did have some discussions with some colleagues because it really does vary from community to community, and sometimes it's the scale of the community. So, Westminster, for example, was a $10,000 threshold and a certain useful life. In talking to some of the managers of some of the smaller communities, in the county, most of them seem, at least the ones that had any kind of standard that they shared, tend to use $5,000. But I think it's an asset that, has a useful life generally of more than 3 years. So some of the items, that are leading to the increase in the IT budget, are sort of right at that threshold, Phil. So I think it's sort of a question mark. Certainly one of the items, was a security assessment, which I view as a kind of a consulting service. So that's certainly not anything that would be capitalized. Same, the dollar amount threshold isn't really met for the new, desktop or laptop and the configuration of that. So I think a number of these items just fall below the threshold for capital, or just the nature of them doesn't quite qualify, in my estimation, rightly or wrongly.
Fair enough. I was just looking because we had some money left in the capital there, and
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what we're going to use it for. I mean, maybe you have a better idea.
I had some of the same questions about some of the more technology items. Like I think there's some funding for the website, which I couldn't really, in the capital line item, and I couldn't really figure out what that would be. Because most of the cost associated with the website is either personnel related in terms of just making updates, or it's the payment that we make to an outside vendor for hosting the website, which I would not consider to be a capital expense.
I thought it was for major overhaul, which I thought we're now past.
Yeah, and typically I would not say, in my experience, that overhauling a website or doing a redesign is typically more of a contractual cost than a capital cost. Because it's certainly not something that's going to depreciate. It's just really sort of a one-time redesign fee, and then you just pay ongoing hosting fees.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead, Phil, sorry.
Lest I forget, I'm just gonna, well, actually, we're gonna get to capital later on, so I'll leave that
Right.
for a moment. Go ahead, Jerry Lee.
I was just going to make sure I understood, Barb and Kaki, what I'm trying to think of the right word for, I guess, logic or methodology you use to determine what your anticipated carryover from FY 2022 will be, because it's quite different from the previous year carryover.
I think it's a little bit difficult to assess exactly what that is, Jerry, so I'm not going to say that it's a perfect assessment. I think there could definitely be some variation. My assumption in coming up with that figure, I guess we're kind of tied to a couple of things. One is that you would probably be positively voting on the ordinance that is coming up a little later in the agenda to increase the reserve accounts, so that when we get towards the end of the year, because undoubtedly there will be, some savings. You have a vacant, town manager position, other things, that may not be accomplished this year. So I assume that the reserves would basically be bumped up both for Yendel and the operating reserve. And that some of the projects that are pending will be completed by June 30th. So I think I had shared with you all just by email earlier today that I sent emails out to the 3 tree companies that we have under contract. And so this is on the operating side. Some of it hits capital to try to get the Strathmore pruning done yet this fiscal year. Andrea had anticipated in the budget that only half of it would be done. And talking to Mr. Normandy, we'll have to see where we are when the price quotations come in. But I think, his feeling is if there's adequate funding to do it, we should try to prune all of the trees along Strathmore this year. So I think I just tried to kind of ballpark, Jerry, kind of where I thought we might be and to be conservative about it. So I certainly don't want to suggest that that number may not come in higher ultimately.
I understand. Thanks. I just wanted to understand. And
Sure.
partly I was asking because I did want to state for the record that I did submit to the council members a proposal for consideration to consider a subsidy for residents who wish to contract for curbside compost pickup. And the reason I was proposing a resident subsidy, I think we could structure it in a way that would allow residents to pick which vendor they want to work with, because right now, people who do that in town, there are multiple, at least 2 vendors who are operating in town already, and so that kind of a structure would allow that flexibility for residents. It would also allow us to set a top limit of the amount that we would budget for that, and sort of do a pilot test for a year to get a sense of resident interest in furthering such an initiative. When we did the survey in 2020, there definitely were a large majority of residents who responded to the survey. We had 121 residents who responded, and a large majority were interested in compost pickup, but they did not want to give up any of our trash service, the twice a week pickup, in order to gain that compost pickup. So I wouldn't want to reduce any of our current service in order to achieve the compost pickup. I think from what I've read and what I've been seeing from what has been shared by GP Can members and others, there does seem to be an overall benefit to promote composting. And while a lot of us do it on our own, I think we have a lot of elderly residents and a lot of people in town who may not really be comfortable composting on their own, and encouraging more composting could have a lot of environmental benefits, not only for the town, but, at large. And there are at least 3 municipalities that I could find in my research who are providing these kind of subsidies: Chevy Chase, Somerset, and I can't remember the third that I found, but I did put it in the note that I sent you. Given some of the revenue concerns we've been discussing tonight, I think I would like to amend the proposal I emailed out to the council members to say I would make my proposal contingent on a prior year carryover that was $15,000 above what is currently estimated in the budget, so that if our carryover allowed for that additional 15,000, that we would, I'd like to propose that we would agree to put that additional 15,000 towards such a pilot in FY23. So I'd like to amend the proposal I sent out to the council members to consider that we would put any additional up to 15,000 in any carryover that comes in above what is budgeted towards a curbside compost pilot in FY23.
I'm trying to unmute. Hi. I love the idea, Jerry. I love the amendment. Actually, I think it's fiscally responsible, and I think at the same time it's forward thinking. So I totally support that. And I love the idea because I'm a composter, so I'm all in. But
Could I ask a question, Jerry Lee? Was it your intent that the subsidy would be based only on those households that participate, or would it be a uniform number that is based on total household in the town?
So what
How do
I
you?
proposed was that we would set a total budget for the pilot, and that would allow, we could set a per household limit, and we could set a limit on the number of households that could participate. We could then set up a process. I didn't want to work out all the tiny details without getting a consensus that we were interested in setting aside a certain amount of money for the project. But we could, solicit interest, and if the amount of interest was above the amount we set aside, we could either use a lottery approach to determine who would get the subsidy, or we could reduce the per house subsidy so that we could spread it thinner across more households, or we could consider at the mid-year, if we have additional overage more than the 15,000 that I'm proposing, to consider making more available to cover the additional interest. So I think there are a number of ways that we could make it potentially meet all the interest that might be there.
Okay, so the pilot does not require 100% participation by, and nor
Residents,
would it,
right, it
nor
would
would
be
it,
based on interest from residents.
right, so, and it wouldn't be calculated on that. So people don't have to do it if they already do it on their own without using a company. A lot of people compost on their own with compost tumblers, so. And
Right,
so a
not
pilot would be
everyone.
smaller. It would be a smaller amount, a smaller number of people, households participating. We'll see
Right,
what
and we
happens.
wouldn't cover their total cost. It would be a small subsidy to sort of incentivize more composting.
Okay.
The homeowner would still have to
I think
pay.
it would depend. I think it would. Sorry, I lost you guys. I think it would
Go
depend on
ahead,
how many
Mark.
households. Sorry, guys. Little dead spot here. Maybe I'm sorry. Maybe you said this. I mean, reality is it could go the other way. I mean, we don't know how many households would want to participate, so it could be. You know, we don't know how far $15,000 is going to take us. It could be, you know, we might get 50 households, and 50 households. You know, I don't know what that equates to per month. You know what I pay, whatever I pay, $240, $12, whatever it is, $240 a year to have compost picked up. So what is it? It's $20.
Right, and the more people who sign up in town, both of the companies I checked with previously would reduce the rate if a certain number of people in town are doing it. So there would be a benefit to all residents who are interested in curbside composting because they get a reduced rate if more people sign up through the subsidy.
And there's no obligation to
In
do it.
turn, reduce
So,
the amount
yeah.
that we need to pay overall. Yeah, you're right, Mario.
What would the rate be if, what is the rate now, and then how much would the subsidy be? It looked like it was $15 a month.
Right. So I checked with hang on. So when I checked hold on, I have to find those notes. I think residents are paying right now between approximately $20 and $30 a month, depending upon which vendor they use in Garrett
Right,
Park.
we pay 20 a month for compost crew.
Right. And when I checked previously with one of the vendors, I can't remember what their threshold was, but depending upon the number, if the number of users goes up, it could be dropped down significantly per household.
Well, I like the way you propose it, Geraldine. If we have the resources after the fiscal year, it's money that was rolled over. It's going to go to good use. There's no obligation for residents to have to participate. We're not forcing anyone to compost. Although I will tell you, composting makes your trash very lovely. It's just rubbish. It's just nonsense. There's no food in it. It's the best thing ever. So I'm supporting of it.
Now, would this continue on? In other words, would the subsidies continue if people decide that they like it?
Well, I'm proposing a 1-year subsidy for evaluation as pilot. Obviously, I think it would have enough value to continue on beyond that, but I am suggesting a pilot project with that capped limit of $15,000 for the year, unless we decided to adjust at the mid-year due to interest. And then I think we could reevaluate at the next budget season whether we would want to continue it on. So I think when we advertise it, if we did, we'd need to make that very clear that this is a test and we're not committing to offer it again in FY24, that we're, testing the interest and satisfaction of residents.
Okay.
Jerry Lee, it still sounds like it would be up to $15,000. So wouldn't the people that don't participate, wouldn't they essentially be subsidizing those that do?
Well, I think you can make that argument for anything that we tax for. You know,
Yeah.
we put money into upkeep of parks and playgrounds, but not every resident uses
Yeah.
playgrounds.
The
All of us
school.
give funding through property taxes to the schools, and not everyone uses the schools. So I think on the whole, this benefits the community by making it an attractive community. There are other nearby communities who are offering compost service, so it could in effect actually have a slight effect on real estate attractiveness. And of course, what we're really getting at here are the climate change benefits of separating organic matter in the waste stream, which I sent you all a link to an article about how that is valuable, and that there are a lot of studies that show the fiscal benefit of separating organic matter out of the regular waste stream.
Do we know, would it cost a lot more to just make it available to everybody? I knew it's an odd way to say it because you would be making it kind of optional to everybody, but just make it all the households have it. Would that cost a lot more than $15,000? Or because you were saying like there would be a volume pricing if more participation? What if all 350 were just paid, or 360 houses, whatever? Would that cost a lot more than $15,000? That way we wouldn't have to worry about lotteries or anything else.
Right. Well, based on the survey, we had about 60 people interested in participating. Or I think it was 50 people in the survey who expressed interest. So um, in my estimate that I sent out, I think it offered two options depending upon how much we did per household. We could cover all of those 50, or we could cover more than double of those if we reduce the amount per household. The thing is, yes, we could propose it. We could set a limit, again, because of the way I tweaked this, that we would only do it if we had enough carryover to fund it. We could state that we would increase it up to $30,000, and that would allow us to do, double the subsidy townwide.
Well, my math is that if we took Mario's yearly cost of 220 and you had 360 households involved, that's $220 a year for 360 households. You're looking at somewhere around $79,000. But
Right,
beside
but I'm proposing
that point,
$10 per limit,
Mary,
per household limit. I'm proposing a $10 per household limit. So
okay,
not to cover their total cost, but so that
yeah,
it's an incentive to compost, not a full coverage.
I get you. I get you. The only thing I'd say, and I'm not sure that the comparison to parks is a fair one, because parks and playgrounds are much broader than anybody would have in their backyard. And, for people who do, for example, do their own composting, there are plenty of people in town who do their own composting. So, why they would want to have to pay for, a company to do it for them, they may not want to. I'm just saying that as a fact. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to be, to debate it. I do have a question though. When you have the composting, does that cost also include the return of the compost itself, the
Yes.
breakdown?
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that, Kaki. That is another benefit. Everyone who
Okay.
participates would get
Hmm.
a certain amount of soil back, and vendors differ on that, so I don't want to say a certain amount, but each vendor does
Hmm.
provide a certain amount of soil back each year from their
Okay.
composted product.
All right. So it's not an extra cost. It just comes with that.
It comes with the service, yes.
Okay.
The delivery of a
Well,
bag.
listen, you all, we are way behind and we have a lot to cover. There's a couple ways we can handle this. If you'd like to just increase the what you might consider the carryover, it's an estimate anyway, and then you can go back and debate, later on if you really want the service or not, or just go ahead and put it in with a pilot and see what happens, or not. So I think we have, hopefully there's enough thought and discussion here that you could make a decision on that. And are there other questions on this FY23 budget? Because we do need to move this agenda along. We have a couple other action items yet.
Just a quick composting question. I'm curious, would it be realistic at all? Like if there were a couple of town composting locations, maybe like one over by the pool, one at Penn Place, and one somewhere west and one somewhere south, like that people could take stuff and then if they wanted to, not necessarily wanting the soil back, but if you wanted to participate just to keep that out of the landfill, you could do it that way. I wonder if that's just make it available to everybody, then you don't have to worry about all this other math. So
that is another option that the services will offer, a group collection point somewhere in town for a much reduced rate. And we could consider trying something like that as a pilot. I think the likely use of that would be probably a fair amount diminished because of the lack of convenience, but I'm open to options.
Yeah, I just say it gets a little stinky.
I was going to
wouldn't support
say,
that.
yeah, and my concern would be, the varmints, the rodents. If you, so I don't know how they do the composting. Maybe it would be, I guess it would be a closed system. I guess it better be. Otherwise we'd have an awful lot of animals.
Right. I think the group collection points, I haven't seen what they look like, but I do. Well, I mean, I've seen pictures, but I think they have covers. I know they have.
Interesting concept. I thought of that. But again, we have our own. We have a tumbler. Okay. Well, I think it's a fair consideration. For a pilot. If you want to go ahead with that, can we park that? Jerry Lee is recommending 15,000 additional to whatever the carryover is if we get there. Jerry Lee, actually, have to look at the table whether or not we want to try to build it into the operations, but we can that gets well, I don't know how much we really discussed that unobligated carryover. In other years, we've had less estimated, and we still end up with a whole bunch more. There is some consideration, and I think Barb is going to get to that, about reducing some of the unobligated carryover from 22 by putting that into capital now in the spring, but we are still confident that there's going to be the 125 plus even more given the spend rate. But what you're suggesting is by the time we get that by mid-year, then we would have, we'd put it, if we've got 140,000 carryover, we'll have more. I'd bet my dollar. But that you would then see that being reappropriated into an operational budget line item is my guess. Right?
That's what I'm proposing. And if we had that commitment in advance, it would be worth doing the work to set up the procedures for the program in the meantime so that it would be ready to go.
So how does that seem to you mechanically, Barb? Does that work? Can we do just, in many ways, let me look at the 22, we could go ahead and put, I want to just see if I don't want to speak out of turn, but if we could put 15,000 on top of that 125 right now, just to have it there and make a note about that. But I need to see our year-to-date expenses. We're sitting at 472. We were going to take 300 out, if I remember correctly. And we'd still be left with 172. So we certainly could do that.
Kaki, to clarify, we would only be taking 100,000 out to if that ordinance that's coming up passes, because that would just increase the 2 reserves. I was hesitant to go much further than that at this point because there are some expenses that are likely to come in the second half of the year, like the Strathmore pruning. So at this point, it's only 100,000 of that 472 that would be envisioned to go to reserves by year end. But I think mechanically, I think if this is something that you all are committed to doing, I mean, I think, Khaki, there's 2 approaches as you've outlined. We can either go ahead and bump up the 125,000 carryover, make it 140, and just assume that's going to happen and go ahead and put the 15,000 in an operational line item. I'd have to probably work with you, Khaki, to figure out where's the best place to put that. Or the other alternative, I think, which was where Jerry started, which is at least sort of establish that there's support, see where we are at mid-year so that the program could be launched as soon as we have a better idea of what the actual carryover is going to be.
Except if you bear with me, we like to have a balanced budget with a 0 net balance.
Right, that's why I was
So-
saying you could bump up the carryover on the one side and then put the 15,000 in an operating expense line item. That would make you
Yeah.
still at 0.
Right, and then we could make a note
Right.
that if the carryover does not meet the goal, this would be the first thing to be dropped, cut from the budget.
So how does everybody feel about that? Because I'm really, the time is ticking away here. I think there's some practical solutions here and reasons. We can just put that out there. We still have to vote on this introduction. So that would be one of the items that we're looking to make a change. We could vote discriminately per each of these changes, or we just vote, in whole at the end to make all these changes. So what I've heard so far, and I'm hoping I didn't lose track, this might, we have an increase for the trash collection for refuse. We have a potential here increase for compost. Were there any other changes? Did I miss anything?
I did want to clarify because we had
Yeah,
a discussion, but we tabled it. I would like to propose that rather than taking the whole, adding the whole amount for the refuse surcharge for energy, rather than adding it all into the homeowner assessment, that we take some amount of it from contingency. So currently the contingency is 50,000 in the proposed budget, whereas last year I think we proposed a 40,000 contingency, so we could go back to 40 and plan to subsidize some of that if we have to pay the surcharge into FY23 rather than charging it back to residents. That's one consideration for the council to consider.
I would counter that with, we're probably liable to get hit with other surcharges, and so we're going to probably have to pull them out of contingency. That was the only reason I would suggest that we look at maybe not doing that. I mean, we could.
That is true. The only other sort of squishy place I saw in operations was that road maintenance line item, or the professional fees. Those seem to be the most likely targets if we wanted to subsidize any potential refuse energy surcharges or other energy surcharges rather than charge it back to the residents.
Are you talking about
Rather than charge it all back to the residents. I'm
Are
sorry?
you talking about fuel charges, or
Right,
you're saying
right.
energy? You mean
Fuel, the fuel surcharges
Okay.
that we were discussing, adding to the refuse collection amount.
Okay. Yeah, you were talking about, you used the word energy.
I did.
Okay. The road maintenance cleaning, I had heard from residents last year that, why aren't we getting the streets cleaned? We've had a major storm. Can't we get the streets cleaned again, swept? And we were restricted by the number of times they could come out. The same thing with leaf removal. We always seem to have people saying, I got piles of leaves here. Can't we get them picked up? So that was why we increased it. And yet, I don't know that, the 10,000 was is written stone anywhere, but certainly if there does become another fuel surcharge being asked, or somehow the price goes up, that you know, I would like to think that within this additional 10,000, it can help cover that. But we have not had, what I've seen is that the roads could have been cleaned more often, and the leaf removal could have been done more often. And I just wanted to ensure that we had that ability this time around. So that's for that one.
I would agree on that one.
Mhm. Okay.
Even here, I like the streets clean.
So where are we? It's 20 of 10.
Should we
Are
noodle
we-
this offline and get back to Jerry Lee's email in the coming weeks, or?
Well,
Or do we-
so do you want, we can still go ahead and increase this. We can, I mean, you all can get back into more discussion on that, on the composting, but we have the budget numbers to take care of. So, and it's intro, we could do the best to make the changes with a motion to approve the budget with the changes. And then, you know, if you have to even slightly tweak it again at adoption in April, you have that ability as well. So just want to move the meeting along. How do you all want to go? We know we have at least two things, right? We've talked about here for changing costs on the operations side. Is there anything else?
I've got something for the capital side, but we're gonna do that.
We haven't even gotten to that. Okay, let's go to the capital.
Well, one I wanted to know is we've got, from looking at the sidewalks,
Mhm.
we've got 257, but we're gonna, right now, what we're on the hook for, I think 125 of that, at least for the thing we just signed for doing Waverly.
146, I think it was.
Right, it's right around 145, 150,000.
And so that would leave us with approximately 100,000 left. And then that leaves us with a project to run between Montrose and Rokeby, or essentially Montrose to Penn Place, which we still have out there. And I guess that's 100,000. I don't know. I guess maybe it's enough.
I don't think so. Think
Yeah.
more. 'Cause it needs stabilization, and it needs a real design. Some things that probably make sense that maybe come out of different buckets, but I think that's more complicated than the other two.
That's what
There's a sidewalk planning line item 32.3, but it only has 7,800 in it right now.
I guess Phil, you're talking more about like the construction, like the GC cost of that. I would tend to agree that with your inclination, it might cost more than 100. So I think we should find more. And that's part of why I was making the point about the operating budget going up before, because to me, I think a lot of what the town needs year to year is a lot of improvements and upgrades on infrastructure and other things that come out of the capital budget. So to me, I'd rather kind of be as sharp as we can with our pencils on the operating budget so that we have more money to plan out and allocate in these capital things. So I think the two are very much tied. And this would be an example of it. I feel like that project should be designed and done really well and be more than just a sidewalk. It should be a good way to exit your car, get out when you're parallel parking. It should have good lighting. It should have good stabilization against the against that slope. It should be doing something that's better for those tree roots that are all exposed and scarred now because of all the soil washing away. It should be something that looks really good as a landscaped edge to that park, not just it's not just the edge of the street, it's the edge of the park. So I think that one really should be done right. I think it's going to cost more than 100.
Thank you. That was exactly what I was thinking. So yes.
All right. Sorry.
No,
sorry
that's fine. That's perfect.
Yeah, I think we've been aligned on that one for a while, I think.
ticked all the boxes on it. So that's why I was getting a bit concerned, because I'm thinking that we may not have enough money to execute it in this year or even next with the amount of money we've got left in the capital. The streets and roads.
Khaki, there was one other operating expense I think we didn't mention. If we agree to using tech type services for FY22, wouldn't we also need to plan that into the FY23 budget as a continuing potential cost?
That's what people want to do.
Good point.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Mhm.
I'm in agreement on the sidewalk. I'm just not sure where we pull it from. That's the only thing. I see what you're saying, Phil.
Phil, how much are you thinking needs to be in sidewalks? So we have an unexpended balance of 200 and roughly 205,000 now in sidewalks. About 150 of that is for the work currently planned. And then as of now, the proposed transfer from the operating account would add another 75,000 to the sidewalk line item. So that would leave about 125,000 in sidewalks as it's currently structured.
I think it'd be better to have it closer to 200.
Okay.
I don't know where the number is going to fall out at. I mean, we can always transfer it if we end up with too much, but I would think that Stephen outlined, and I agree, it's going to be a little more extensive than just what we've done in the past.
Well, it's a shorter sidewalk. I don't think it's going to be $200,000. It'll be more. We have two sections of sidewalk on Oxford and Waverly that are going to cost 146. I could see 150 tops, but I can't see 200, only because the other elements that you've talked about wouldn't even come under sidewalks. If you're talking about lighting, if you're talking about, we need additional, we don't have all the trees we used to have. And I know Barb, you were going to talk with Phil Normandy about that. I don't think, you may have some major backfill, but that's dirt. That doesn't cost a lot. I think 200,000 is really way high. And that's just because of what I've been dealing with sidewalks for the last 3 years. I wouldn't be, I think 150 is high, but I'd be comfortable with that. Conservative, that would be a conservative high for me, because I think there's going to be costs there that are not on the sidewalk line that'll come into play, but they'll be against other line items.
We'll pull the lights somewhere else. So.
Yeah, no, they won't be part of the sidewalk.
Okay, well, that's
It'll be
fine.
utilities, other items.
Yeah,
I
I would just remind everyone that you do have 64,000 in the contingency account at this time if you wanted to reallocate some of that contingency line item to another project.
And I'm
sorry, Kathy, go ahead.
No, we all know, the big elephant in the room here.
I know.
Do you know where I'm going?
I was about to say exactly the same thing, but you can say it.
I don't know though. We got ARPA funds.
Right, that's exactly
And
what I
ARPA
was
funds are going to, yeah. And we know there's stormwater. We've put a whole, placed estimates here for stormwater work, even some of the utilities and other stuff that can be done with ARPA funds. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think you're actually fine with, even as Barb said, I think you said, Barb, there's about 125,000
right
after we do the Waverly Oxford,
right.
this current phase, that there'll be another 100, there's still 125, and we're gonna have other money available to move from. And of course it'll take an action of council, because we'd be moving across major line items to do that on capital, but that's easier. And because we have ARPA, ARPA is going to take a lot of the funding here.
Could I,
Hi, may I? Sorry,
go
Elephant
Sure.
speaking.
go ahead, Donna.
Just saying elephant speaking, but I wanted to say that at the end of the day, this is a budget, and none of us on this call or those of us listening are mind readers or I don't know, prophets or what have you. And if you are, come over, say hi. But aside from that, it's a budget. And so as long as the line item is there, I think we can quite reasonably and sufficiently address any issues should they rise, ARPA or no ARPA. And just wanted to put that dose of reality out there. Thank you.
I would agree. We can always, if we need an extra 20 or 30 or 40, we can find a way within 2 council meetings to knock that out. I think, Kaki, it can be
Absolutely.
moved under the 0.0 anyway, right? Like within 3 days, is that right? Like the 27.0, or not 27.0, but the 32.0. Things can move under that.
Yes, you can move within a major line item within that category. Yeah, you don't even need 3 days.
Yeah, I'm looking
Not
at
that I recall. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Right, but if you want to use the contingency, it's just a 3-day thing. I was just wondering under streets and curbs, if there's any room there. I'm not sure what our annual planned expense on streets and curbs is.
Yeah, Kaki, if I may, I've actually had some discussion with Jason Azar about, and Kaki, I don't even think you and I have even had a chance to talk about this, but of having Jason Azar, someone from his team, come out and actually do sort of a pavement assessment. The last capital plan we had for some of our infrastructure dates back to 2013. I certainly would not suggest we bid any road paving right now just because of the escalated oil prices. I had some communications with Jason earlier today about this, but I do think it would be helpful to actually get an up-to-date assessment so we could have a multi-year plan of what we might be anticipating in terms of that particular line item that Jerry just mentioned.
Okay, Barb, if I could interject, and I don't know if you had this conversation with Andrea, but she had some special software and she actually went around town, and I think maybe with George.
She drove it. I can give you access to that, Kaki.
I don't need to see it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's using technology, which I think is good, but I think when you're actually looking at pavement conditions, I'm not sure it's the best tool, quite frankly. After sort of looking at some of the data, I still think it might be.
Really?
Yeah, that's sort
Okay.
of my assessment of it. I don't think I think it picks up some things, but nothing I think is as good as getting an engineer or an engineering tech out there to actually inspect the infrastructure.
Okay.
I would agree. The last time I walked, I think it was only one time, but walked with the town contract engineer looking at a lot of different streets. He was pointing out things I wouldn't have seen or understood about like the paving. And I actually do this like a little bit part-time as for a living, like looking at roads and parking lots on private property. So like I learned a little bit from him just from things I didn't know. It was just like the asphalt was poured when it was too liquidy in one place.
Right.
And things like that really need a professional to kind of see. So
yeah, I think at a high, kind of satellite level, you'll know there's cracks, but whether or not those can be sealed or, you actually need to do some base repairs, I don't know that it's going to be that good at picking that up. And that's where some of the cost differential is really going to come from.
Okay, I know she walked around town with a handheld. She
drove it. Yeah. Her
Okay.
very last
We don't need
day.
to waste any more time talking about that. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I just wanted to be sure you knew about that and whether that made a difference. Okay, I defer. I trust you.
Okay.
Okay. So we're basically leaving. I think we're leaving capital where things are. Is that my understanding?
Yes, for now, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. We're looking at 2 different changes on the operational side of the house. The 15,000 for a pilot for composting, and roughly, I think we're looking at, was it 18,000 to increase for the refuse, the trash collection.
Right.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve the introduction of this FY23 budget with those changes? And it is 5 of 10.
I'm sorry, Kaki. What about the election increase? Do we need to add that third item?
Let's look at that quick. There might be something in here that, again, we have contingency, and we're only talking about maybe what, $6,000, $7,000.
Yes.
I think we probably don't, it would come out of one of the current line items, and
Jack up professional fees by $7,000. Can you just jack up professional fees by $7,000?
we could, but then you're talking more about tying the budget. I don't know if the professional fees, I mean, hold on a second. Let me look at something. We have $9,500 slated for elected and appointed officials. We have $578 spent to date out of the FY22 budget. I don't know that we're going to need all that 9,500. I guess where I'm going is, like we've talked about with capital, I'm trying to make this easy. I'm trying to make it quick right now, that if we'll have a better idea, maybe at mid-year, whether we need to actually shore one of these line items up for another 7,000, rather than trying to balance this budget, because we have to redo some numbers anyway. But we've got contingency. We have.
You nail it though, Kaki, because it could be out of that line, the elected officials, right? Because I think you're right. We're not going to have anything to spend that on before June, right? And that's more than 7,000.
Well, the only thing I can think of is the MML right now, if people are going to want to go to MML, but otherwise I don't think there will be much out of there spent. So, that's why, yeah, rather than even try to take 9,500 away, I mean, I guess if we did, I just don't know where that'll be next year. There are certain fees that go on, and Andrea, when she was town manager, she used more of this towards her accreditation.
Right.
That wasn't in 22. I think that was in a prior year. The actual there was 12,762 in 2021. But you see in actual expenses in 2020, that same line was 8,000 for actual. So that's why I kind of don't want to mess with it. And yet I think by mid-year, we'll have a better idea.
Yeah, I think, Kaki, probably what happened is so many of the conferences like MML went virtual, obviously, the last couple of years. And so there just wasn't travel expenses or hotel. I will need to check this, but I need to verify what line item the electech expenses came out of back in FY 2020. I'm not sure it wasn't 11.2.1, but I will need to check that. So my suggestion, Jackie, on that is maybe give me a chance to actually look that up and try to see if there's a way to address the concern that's been raised. But if it did come out of general expenses, then it might already be built into the number.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I bet you're right. It could be general expenses, unless we used to have a support services line, but maybe that's kind of where it is now. Yeah, I think we're gonna, if we could do that, all right, if council's okay with that, I think, we have room to work that if we need to.
I think that makes sense, especially if there's a possibility it was already built in from the previous year.
Yeah. Okay. So if there's no more discussion, would anybody like to raise the question? Make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
Oh, go ahead, Donna.
Thanks. Thanks, Jerry Lee. I'd like to make a motion to accept budget. I would like to make the motion to accept
You're
budget
accepting?
as with the edits that we have made just now.
Okay, so you're making the motion to approve the introduction of the FY23 capital operating budgets with the two changes proposed.
Correct. Thank you for the correct terminology.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Let's go. All in favor. Phil, how do you feel?
In favor? Yes.
Okay. Stephen?
Yes.
Okay. Mario, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm here. Yes.
Okay, great. And then we have we had Donna and we had Jerry Lee already making the motion, so they're on board. Okay, so approved with those changes. Okay, you got it, Barb?
Yep, I think so.
Okay, all right. 10 o'clock. New committee appointments, that's me. And we put the names out. Let's see. So I am recommending, let's see, I'm recommending for the archives, Brian Mizaguchi and Joe May. I don't know if we should need to vote on these separately, or can we vote them all together? Arboretum would be Sean Conlon and Malcolm Russell Einhorn. And the historic preservation, where all seats were vacant, Susie Balamasi, Nancy Walls, Eric Chapman, Stan McLeod, and Brian Mizaguchi. And we are staggering them. What did I do with my? I have to go get my terms. Hold on a second. Let's see. Okay, so I would have under archives, I have Joe May. He will be for archives. His term will end on March of 2027. It's a 5-year term for archives. Brian, just to keep it staggered, his term will end March 2026. On Arboretum, Sean Conlon's term would end March 2027. Again, it's a 5-year term. And Malcolm's would end March 2026. This allows for everybody to be staggered, so nobody's leaving it at the same time. Historic preservation, I have Nancy. Her term is expiring January 25th. It's the charter is a 3-year term, so hers would expire January 25th. I have Brian Mizaguchi would expire March 2025. Did I make that right? January 2025 for Nancy, Brian, March 2025. Susie Balamasi, November 2024. Stan McLeod would be January 2024, and Eric Chapman would be June 2024. The only additional remark about the historic preservation, and Nancy mentioned this to me, and I think she's right. The charter or the ordinance calls for a 3-year term, and she thinks, and I agree, and I think other people do, I'm not the only one, that the term should be increased to perhaps 5 years, like the other town committees. But that'll take an ordinance to do that. And when that happens, if council approves to do an ordinance to change the term length, then we'd go back and readjust these terms of these individuals, these 5 members. That's where we are. So those are the mayor's appointments, and I need council approval.
Jackie,
I'll make the motion. Sorry, go ahead.
given the late hour, I wonder if you would just agree to attach to the minutes a summary of the interest statements that the volunteers provided. Given that we are, when we vote, we're approving. I don't know all of these people, so it just might be helpful to have that as part of the minutes, a little bit of a summary of their interest statement.
Well, I actually wrote up something. So, I mean, this was expression of interest, brief as it was. Some maybe were longer. And they were sent to the mayor and town manager. So I can just say that Eric Chapman moved to Garrett Park with his wife, Devorah, and 2 young children a couple of years ago. As a new resident, he's interested in learning all things about Garrett Park and sharing this with family and friends, and he lives at 1111. So 11110 Kenilworth. He's next to the old Melville house. Brian Mizoguchi has lived at 11012 Montrose with his wife Anne and their family for more than 20 years. And he serves as Associate General Counsel for the Department of Agriculture, and his work occasionally involves issues related to the environment and historic preservation. Stan McLeod and his wife Jane, they've raised their family at 11015 Kenilworth since 1985. Their home, originally built in 1898, continues to showcase much of its Victorian elegance and charm. So with a strong track record in community service, Stan knows what it takes and looks forward to doing the same with the HPC. I'm very pleased by their willingness to volunteer and to learn and to give of their time. And I want to say that it's, I think, important for the community and for the culture of our town that when volunteers put their name in, that we recognize their interest. And I also want to thank all those volunteers who came before and who are willing to serve now. So is there an approval for these?
Even no objection for me.
Well, yes, I'll make a motion to approve if that's necessary. Thank you. That's fine. And then what's the steps to change the ordinance for the Historic Preservation Committee?
Well,
Not for tonight, but just, is that a good, put that on the agenda for another town meeting? Town council meeting?
Yeah, it would.
Yes.
And I'd like to work with, Stephen, who's the late council liaison for historic preservation. We could work on it's basically taking the text that is in the ordinance right now, and instead of, it cites 3-year terms, that we would change it to 5. And I don't know, if Stephen thought there was something else in there we should change, certainly discuss it and see, what council feels. But.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I could take that up with the committee and see if there's anything else that needs any kind of updating. I think that was made in 1970 something. So,
Okay.
not really
Yeah.
good for it to be different.
Maybe we could Yeah, we could bring it, forward in April if you wanted. But that, there's a lot going on. Didn't think that there was room for that tonight, and, we'll see how things are.
We
Okay.
could shoot for April.
All
I
right,
guess
so
we could have a meeting with that committee first, so I can
Sure.
go through all that with them and like go through what's in the ordinance with them, and then see what opinions they have. It'd be a great first meeting to have with the new crew.
Okay.
That's fine. It's not a
You
pressing
know.
issue. I just wanted to ask. That's
Yeah.
it's fine.
Okay, so we've got we had motions made. You could take a vote if you want, or unanimous. Ask Phil.
Okay, well, I was gonna say I also seconded. I don't know if somebody had seconded it. If not, I will. And,
Okay, I maybe thought Stephen had, but
No
Stephen
objection.
had, and that was Jerry Lee. Okay, and Donna, you there?
No objections.
Okay, and Mario had made motion. Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay, 10:10. Introduction of ordinance to making the adjustments to the fiscal year 2022 reserve accounts. So this is basically an amendment to the mid-year. Let's see. Well, actually, we're not going to say it that way, are we? But go ahead. Barb, would you take us through this? And
Sure, I'll just be very brief given the lateness of the hour, but as we already talked about back at the budget work session in February, you all approved increases in two reserves, one taking the operating reserve from 175,000 to 250,000, and the other increasing the Yendel Park Reserve from 50,000 to 75,000. As you all have talked about extensively this evening, it's anticipated that there will be sufficient funds at year end. And so what this ordinance would do was basically allow us to take those unallocated funds and use them to basically spend $100 to bump up these reserve accounts. That's it.
And if you will, we're currently at February year-to-date expenses showing about $472, 472,000. I wish it was unobligated, and we are already trending. And Barb, let me get my your town manager's financial report for February to see that the target for February right now, year to date, 66.6%. That's the target to hit, and that's just a calendar formula percent.
Right.
And we are currently about 52, well, almost 53%. So we're well below on our spend rate. And if you compare that to FY 2021, where we were at 63%. So, we definitely are behind, at least in terms of percentage of spend. And we're already sitting with 472,000 unobligated. That's why there is not much concern that we wouldn't be able to go ahead and do this and still have sufficient unobligated carryover by the end of this fiscal year.
Correct. So really, this ordinance would just implement your direction that you gave in February and make sure that those reserve accounts are at the level that you wanted them to be prior to the start of fiscal year 2023.
Great.
so
do we need to make a sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Sorry, I've got a quick comment. Can we do something with the last whereas, because it's very vague?
This is what happens, Phil, when you're drafting it at like 9 o'clock on a Thursday night.
I understand.
Yeah, I was really impressed that Barb actually got this out.
Yeah, I mean, I can walk you through that very briefly. If you look at the reserve fund summary in your agenda packet, so I was trying not to wear you out with whereas clauses. So if you look at the Penn Place tenant security deposits, Some of those, the current deposit amount basically reflects the tenants who left Penn Place some number of years ago. So this would basically take that reserve account down, so it would only reflect the security deposits being held by Black Market. The other one would be the wind case reimbursement. We've been holding 2,066. You may recall the wind case reimbursement was something that was the result of a court case in Maryland a number of years ago. What the town owed back has already been processed. So essentially it would just release that reserve and basically take the reserve amount for the wind case to zero. So that's why I kind of phrased some Phyllis technical corrections, because I figured it would be easier to explain than to try to write in an ordinance. But certainly if it would make you all feel more comfortable, you could move to amend the ordinance to basically say exactly what I said. And I can bring that back to you as a modified ordinance at your meeting in April.
I would like to, because it's way
Sure.
too vague for me.
Sure. So I think if in your motion, assuming you make a motion to approve this, if you can sort of leave it to me to kind of craft the language, kind of provide a general direction, but I will make those technical corrections and bring that back to you as an amended ordinance next month.
I think that makes sense. I just want to make sure I understood correctly. So the Penn Place security deposits had been paid back to the former tenants. It just hadn't yet been reflected in the reserve balance?
That's my understanding from Mary.
Okay. And the wind case reimbursement, did you say this is what we did not have to pay out, and that will now go back into our budget?
Right. It actually has been paid back. So essentially the way the state processed the wind case reimbursements is they actually took it from your income tax allocation. It was processed over a series of years. We didn't know as much as many people, but yes, we have fully satisfied that.
Okay, so but this $2,066 isn't going to be paid to anyone. It's going to be returned to our budget?
Yeah, it's considered an expenditure because it ends up kind of zeroing out. It's an expenditure from the restricted reserve account, but it essentially gets processed as a revenue, a bump in revenue.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's
Unless
when you
we can, sorry, Jerry Lee. Well, I was going to ask
I'm
then,
assuming
Barb,
you're
I
going to
mean,
fix what I was asking.
to move the 2,066 up to one of the other lines. We don't really, I mean, do we, mechanically,
You could do that. Yeah, you could do that.
Not all restricted. There's targeted and restricted. And I mean,
Right.
Some of these reserves have much more requirement to them, but these don't.
Yeah, so you could do that. I just kind of felt it looked a little cleaner to basically be showing you that you were seeing the $75,000 that you elected to bump up the operating reserve, and so you could see it. But practically, Kaki, you're correct. Those numbers could be absorbed and just changed.
Right, but I understand. So your preference would be what we've done in the past when we take some money from a reserve is we bring it over by revenue, and then we reallocate it over on operations. Or not, and put it back into, whichever way, capital or wherever we want to send it. So yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
To speed this up, whereas the town manager has identified other reserve accounts in need of modification, such as the wind case reimbursement can be zeroed out, and the Penn Place tenant security deposit can be reduced by, but I don't know how much. Do you know?
Yeah, it's the $1,888.
It's being reduced by that much or to that amount?
It is being reduced by that amount. So it's being adjusted to from 4,948 to 3,060.
3,960, something like that. All right, so you could just say we will reduce the wind case reimbursement to zero, and the Penn Place tenant security deposit to 3,000. What'd you say? 960?
3,060.
3,060.
Yeah.
So that would be the language you could use unless you guys want to come up with something else. And I'm just trying to be quick here.
I'm just fine with proposing it the way it is, with the idea that Barb crafts it and
Sure.
back
Yeah,
to
she
it.
was asking for some language though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can play around with it, but I think I understand the direction that you all want to go. So
Agreed.
Would anybody like to make a motion now on the, are we done? No,
I think
yeah.
Phil made
Does
a
anybody want to
motion.
make a motion on this?
I'll make the motion that we accept this ordinance with the changes as we've discussed.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, and in favor or not, Stephen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, and Donna? Are you there, Donna?
Yay.
Okay,
Yes, I
And-
am.
okay.
I said yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I heard you. Thank you. And Mario?
Yes.
Okay. So approved. Thank you. Okay, I would like to ask, is there anything under town updates that we need to do tonight?
No.
For sake of time, it's 20 after 10. Could we, is there anything that we need, that's pressing we need to update right now? Or could we
Nothing for me.
go ahead?
Not for me.
No.
Okay. And Stephen, are you there? Are you okay? And Mario?
Yeah, I'm okay to move on.
100%. Let's go. I'm gonna have to go up anyway. I
Okay.
have to get up and get gas. So
Okay, hold 1 second, then we're gonna skip the town updates for the record here because of time. Barb, you have a manager's financial report and manager's report. Do you need to say?
The only thing I just wanted to highlight for you all, which is a good news way to end the meeting, is that in addition to expedited bill 222, that basically will give us more funding in tax duplication payments for FY23. The county council also adopted a separate bill, which was a supplemental appropriation for the current fiscal year. So this sort of ties to some of what you've been talking about in terms of carryover, potentially. We will receive, according to the information in the county council agenda packet, an additional $44,206 in tax duplication payment this year, and we should receive that money before June 30th. So I think that certainly gives you some latitude as well. Everything else, I think, is just, we've already talked about income taxes lagging, and I think those were the only two things, Khaki.
Okay, well, that's great news. Even more
Yeah.
money to spend.
Exactly, yes.
Way to
All right.
bury the bleed, Barb.
Okay, I am gonna adjourn this meeting unless there's anything council members want to say. Okay,
No, but
Thank
thank you
you.
to Barb for a great job on the budget,
Oh.
though.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
agreed. Agreed.
Information and
Thank you,
research.
really terrific, Barb.
Mhm.
Really did a great job. Okay,
Agreed.
it's now 10:20,
100%.
10:22, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good
Have
night,
a good night.
everybody.
Good night, everybody.